2:22 a.m. The South China Sea, 96 nautical miles east of the Paracel Islands. The water here is deep, 4,000 meters to the abyssal plain below the keel, and the surface on this night is running a long, easy swell from the northeast, sea state 2, air temperature 29 degrees Celsius, wind at 12 knots, visibility unlimited. The sky above the formation is black and completely clear, every star in the western Pacific burning cold and precise from horizon to horizon, without a cloud between them and the ships below. The USS Ronald Reagan, CVN-76, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the ninth ship of her class and the forward-deployed carrier of the United States 7th Fleet, based at Commander Fleet Activities Yokosuka in Japan, holds course at 16 knots on a northwesterly heading that carries her toward the center of the South China Sea on a freedom of navigation transit. Her two A4W nuclear reactors run at 39% power. Her four propellers push 45,000 tons of warship and air wing across the dark water at a pace that will carry her through the Paracel Island chain's eastern approach corridor by dawn. Her air wing, Carrier Air Wing 5, 44 strike aircraft and 16 support and rotary platforms. Her complement, 5,107 officers and enlisted personnel. She has operated in the South China Sea continuously for 23 days. This is her ocean. She has been told this by every deployment order issued from Commander 7th Fleet since she arrived in Yokosuka, and she demonstrates the fact simply by being here. Around her, in standard formation, the cruiser USS Antietam, CG-54, 1 mile ahead, her AN/SPY-1A in continuous active search. The Arleigh Burke destroyers USS Mustin, DDG-89, and USS Chancellorsville, DDG-62, at the forward quarters. The destroyer USS Curtis Wilbur, DDG-54, at the stern quarter, all three destroyers run an Aegis baseline 9.C1. Above the formation at 22,000 feet, the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye from Carrier Air Wing 5 maintains its racetrack orbit, its AN/APY-9 covering 300 nautical miles in all directions. At combat air patrol altitude, two FA-18F Super Hornets sweep the northwest sector, the bearing from which the People's Liberation Army Air Force Xi'an H-6K Maritime Strike bombers would have to come if they were coming tonight. They were coming tonight. The PLAAF maintained maritime strike bomber regiments at Lingshui Air Base on Hainan Island and at Yongxing Island in the Paracels for one purpose: engaging American carrier strike groups in the South China Sea. The H-6K carries the YJ-12, a two-stage solid fuel and ramjet weapon released at standoff range, while the bomber turns and escapes. The YJ-12 flies the final 400 kilometers independently at sea-skimming altitude, activating its ramjet sustainer at 150 kilometers from target to accelerate from subsonic cruise to Mach 3 in 90 seconds. Warhead, 300 kilograms. Terminal altitude, 7 to 10 meters. A credible threat against any close-in defense, if it reaches that range. At Lingshui and Yongxing, 14 H-6K bombers had been loaded, fueled, and positioned for launch over the preceding 6 hours. 14 aircraft, each carrying two YJ-12 anti-ship cruise missiles on their underwing pylons. 28 YJ-12 missiles total. The launch plan called for 2 coordinated waves, 8 aircraft launching simultaneously from Yongxing Island at close range, their missiles released at 400 kilometers from the formation, and 6 aircraft from Lingshui releasing from slightly greater range. The 28 missiles were programmed for simultaneous time-on-target arrival across a 90-second window, approaching the formation from 3 separate bearing groups, northwest, north-northwest, and north, to force the defensive geometry to cover 3 separate threat axes at the same moment. The plan planners had assessed that this combination of supersonic terminal approach, low altitude, simultaneous multi-axis arrival, and a warhead large enough to disable a carrier with a single hit made the YJ-12 salvo a credible threat to achieve at least 3 to 5 hull impacts on the Reagan or her escorts. They made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: the H-6K radar emissions. The 14 H-6K bombers, conducting their approach to launch position at medium altitude and subsonic speed, were emitting continuous navigational and targeting radar signals. The H-6K's Doppler navigation system and the YJ-12's pre-launch seeker alignment emissions. That the E-2D's electronic intelligence receiver had been logging since the aircraft departed their bases at 1:14 a.m. The E-2D's AN/ALQ-99 derived passive signal collection capability had classified 14 separate H-6K emission signatures by 1:31 a.m. and had been transmitting the complete picture to the formation's Link 16 network for 51 minutes before the first YJ-12 launched. The Reagan strike group had known the exact number, bearing, altitude, and approach vector of every H-6K in the attacking force for 51 minutes before the attack initiated. The strike group commander had placed the formation at general quarters at 1:37 a.m., 45 minutes before the first missile launched. There was no moment of surprise. There was no window of confusion. There was only preparation. The second mistake: the launch altitude. The H-6K releases its YJ-12 missiles at medium altitude, approximately 8,000 meters, where the missile's initial ballistic trajectory carries it downward and forward before the sustainer motor ignites and the weapon transitions to its cruise phase. The missile's launch transient from altitude, the brief radar return of a 2,000-kilogram YJ-12 separating from an H-6K at 8,000 meters, was visible to the E-2D's AN/A PY-9 in air-to-air search mode from the moment of separation. The E-2D crew classified the launch events within 4 seconds of first separation and had all 28 YJ-12 tracks confirmed and transmitted to the formation's CEC network within 31 seconds of the first missile being released. The formation had the complete threat picture while every YJ-12 was still in its initial descent phase before any weapon had activated its cruise motor. The third mistake: the terminal altitude assumption. The YJ-12's 7 to 10 meter sea-skimming terminal profile was designed to exploit the horizon limitation of surface-based search radars. A ship's radar horizon at sea level is approximately 25 nautical miles against a 10-meter altitude target, compared to the E-2D's 300 nautical mile coverage from 22,000 feet. The plan targeting model had designed the YJ-12's low terminal approach specifically to compress the surface ship's intercept window against a target they could not detect until it was close, against an E-2D that had tracked every YJ-12 from the moment of launch, transmitting continuous track data to every ship in the formation via CEEC. The sea-skimming terminal profile was irrelevant. The surface ships never needed to detect the YJ-12 on their own radars. The E-2D had been tracking it for them since before the missile reached its cruise altitude. The compressed detection window the plan had engineered through low-altitude flight did not exist in a CEC-networked engagement. The fourth mistake: the simultaneous arrival window. 28 YJ-12 missiles programmed for time-on-target arrival across a 90-second window was a significant simultaneous engagement requirement, the largest single-salvo anti-ship missile attack in the post-Cold War operational record. But the CEC-network's engagement capacity against a 90-second arrival window was not the capacity of a single ship. It was the combined capacity of 4 ships: Antietam, Mustin, Chancellorsville, and Curtis Wilbur, each assigned threat tracks by the CEC engagement manager based on geometric advantage, each firing independently but contributing to a unified engagement solution that distributed the 28 YJ-12 tracks across a magazine of more than 280 ready interceptors. Against a single-ship defense, 28 simultaneous supersonic anti-ship missiles arriving across 90 seconds would stress the close-in engagement capacity severely. Against a 4-ship networked defense, it was a manageable queue. The 5th mistake was the same error that has characterized every planned anti-carrier planning effort since the YJ-12 was declared operational: the assumption that the weapon's terminal performance against an isolated defensive system predicted its effectiveness against a defense in-depth architecture that engages the threat not at sea-skimming altitude in the final 10 nautical miles, but at cruise altitude 400 nautical miles away, minutes after launch. The YJ-12's Mach 3 terminal phase was designed to defeat Phalanx CIWS. The Reagan strike group was not defending at the Phalanx layer. It was defending at the SM-6 layer, 250 nautical miles out, while the YJ-12 was still in subsonic cruise at medium altitude and the engagement geometry was clean. The solution was favorable, and the odds were entirely on the side of the interceptor. At 2:22 a.m. and 8 seconds after the first YJ-12 separated from its H-6K launch aircraft over the South China Sea, the formation-wide engagement order transmits: all units Antietam, execute Reagan defense, Alpha package, weapons free, all designated tracks, CEC control. 8 seconds. That was the gap between the first missile launch and the engagement authorization. Not because the watch teams needed time to process the threat, because the rules of engagement required a confirmed launch event before weapons-free authorization, and the E-2D's track data constituted that confirmation the moment the first YJ-12 separated. The USS Antietam fires first. 20 SM-6. Dual I missiles climb from the cruiser's forward and aft VLS cells in a 24-second ripple at 2:22 a.m. and 16 seconds. The first SM-6 airborne 24 seconds after the first YJ-12 launched. The SM-6 Dual I carries the active radar seeker and dual-mode infrared capability that allows autonomous terminal guidance. Once launched and handed off to its own seeker, the Antietam's fire control radar is free to assign new tracks without waiting for the first salvo to complete. The CEIC engagement manager assigns the SM-6 targets from the Northwest Bearing Group. The 8H-6K aircraft from Yongxing Island had released their 16 missiles closest to the formation, giving them the shortest range to target and the highest time sensitivity for intercept. At 2:23 a.m., the USS Mustin fires 18 SM-6 Dual I against the north-northwest, bearing Group's 12 YJ-12 tracks. USS Chancellorsville fires 16 SM-6 at the same interval against the overlapping north-northwest and north-bearing tracks. USS Curtis Wilbur fires 12 SM-6 against the north-bearing Group's trailing elements. 66 SM-6 Dual I interceptors airborne across 4 ships in 71 seconds. The YJ-12 12 missiles are now 400 kilometers from the formation, in subsonic cruise at their transition altitude of 3,000 meters, their ramjet sustainers not yet ignited. They're flying at Mach 0.85, visible to the E-2D at 300 nautical miles, tracked by the CEC network with the precision of a composite track updated 60 times per second. Against a subsonic cruise phase target at medium altitude, the SM-6 dual eyes intercept geometry is favorable. Closing speeds are high, the target's maneuvering is limited by its cruise flight profile, and the SM-6's active seeker can acquire the YJ-12's turbojet exhaust signature against the dark sky background at 30 kilometers. The first SM-6 intercepts begin at 2:27 a.m., 5 minutes and 8 seconds after the first YJ-12 launched. The engagement sequence is methodical and relentless. The CEC network tracks each YJ-12, assigns an interceptor, confirms the intercept via the SM-6's target assessment data link, and reassigns the fire control to the next track. Intercept by intercept, the 28 YJ-12 tracks are systematically reduced. At 2:27 a.m., intercepts on 6 northwest bearing group tracks. The SM-6's active radar seeker acquires the YJ-12's cruise body at 22 kilometers and guides to proximity detonation. The continuous rod warhead expanding in a lethal fragmentation ring that ruptures the YJ-12's fuel section and destroys its guidance electronics. 6 YJ-12 missiles fall into the South China Sea in cruise phase, their ramjets never igniting. At 2:29 a.m., 7 more intercepts across the northwest and north-northwest bearing groups. The USS Antietam fires her second SM-6 salvo, 12 missiles, against the survivors of the northwest bearing group as the CEC network confirms the first salvo results and reassigns tracks. 8 confirmed intercepts. 4 YJ-12 missiles survive the first 2 SM-6 salvos on the northwest axis and reach their 150-kilometer terminal activation range at 2:31 a.m. Their ramjets ignite. Mach 2, Mach 2.5, Mach 3 in 90 seconds. 4 YJ-12 terminal bodies now approaching at Mach 3, sea skimming at 8 meters altitude, active radar seekers locked on the formation. The Antietam detects the 4 terminal phase YJ-12 activations on her SPY-1A. The ramjet ignition signature and the sudden Mach 3 velocity change is unmistakable in the fire control track data. She fires 8 SM-2 Block 3B in a rapid sequence, 2 per terminal target. The SM-2's infrared terminal seeker acquires the YJ-12's ramjet exhaust against the dark sea surface at 22 nautical miles. First terminal YJ-12, SM-2 proximity detonation at 8.1 nautical miles from the formation. Second, 6.3 nautical miles. Third, 7.8 nautical miles. Fourth J-12 defeats the first SM-2. The interceptor's proximity fuse activates on the edge of its lethal radius, causing partial effect that shreds the YJ-12's port intake, but fails to destroy its guidance section. The terminal body continues, damaged, at Mach 2.4. The second SM-2 assigned to this track detonates at 3.1 meters. The damaged YJ-12's guidance section is destroyed by the fragmentation pattern. The terminal body loses control, pitches nose down, and impacts the South China Sea at Mach 1.86.2 nautical miles from the Reagan's hull. Its warhead fusing conditions, requiring a controlled impact against a steel hull at a specific angle, are not met by a high-speed ocean impact. The warhead does not detonate. A large splash, nothing more. On the north-northwest and north axes, the engagement is equally systematic. USS Mustin and USS Chancellorsville work through the remaining 16 YJ-12 tracks with SM-6 and SM-2 salvos across a 12-minute engagement window. 9 YJ-12 missiles on these axes survive the first SM-6 salvo and activate their ramjet sustainers in the terminal phase. All 9 are engaged by SM-2 Block 3B from USS Mustin and USS Curtis Wilbur as they enter the terminal phase. 7 intercepts on first SM-2 salvo. 2 YJ-12 terminal bodies survived the initial SM-2 engagement and close to within 14 nautical miles of the formation at Mach 2.8. The E-2D vectors, the 2F/A-18F Super Hornets from Combat Air Patrol onto the surviving terminal threats, a firing solution against a Mach 2.8 sea-skimming target at 14 nautical miles, is at the boundary of the AIM-120D AMRAAM's effective engagement envelope against a low-altitude supersonic target, but the geometry is achievable. The first F/A-18F fires 2 AIM-120D against the nearest surviving YJ-12 terminal body. The AMRAAM's active radar seeker acquires the YJ-12 at 10 miles, intercept at 6 nautical miles. The second F/A-18F engages the final surviving terminal body with 2 AIM-120D. First missile misses. The AMRAAM's terminal guidance algorithm reaches its angular tracking limit against a target this close to the sea surface at Mach 2.8, and the missile passes 7 meters above the YJ-12. Second AMRAAM. Intercept at 4 nautical miles. The terminal body's ramjet sustainer is destroyed by the blast fragmentation warhead. The casing tumbles into the sea at 3.9 nautical miles from the Reagan's hull. The warhead does not detonate. 2:34 a.m., 12 minutes and 14 seconds since the first YJ-12 separated from its H-6K over the South China Sea. 28 YJ-12 anti-ship cruise missiles, all 28 neutralized. 16 eliminated in subsonic cruise phase by SM-6 Dual I, 10 eliminated in supersonic terminal phase by SM-2 Block 3B, 2 eliminated by AIM-120D AMRAAM from F/A-18F. 0 warhead detonations. 0 hull contacts on any ship. 0 American casualties. The Reagan's Strike Group Commander transmits his post-engagement summary. All units, Strike Group. All 28 tracks neutralized. 0 hull contact, 0 damage across the formation. All ships fully mission capable. Authorize Pacific Hammer. Execute. Pacific Hammer was the pre-planned kinetic response package maintained by 7th Fleet for the contingency of a PLAAF Maritime Bomber Strike on the Reagan Strike Group. It was current, updated 36 hours earlier when the NRO satellite pass had imaged the 14 H-6K aircraft being armed and positioned at Lingshui and Yongxing. Every aim point had been reviewed and cleared. The H-6K aircraft were the primary target. Not just the missiles they had fired, but the aircraft themselves, their maintenance infrastructure, the fuel storage, and the command and coordination nodes that had directed tonight's operation. At 2:35 a.m., the USS Antietam opens 16 VLS cells. 16 Tomahawk Block 5 missiles climb from the cruiser's forward and aft decks in a 19-second ripple, heading northwest toward Yongxing Island and the Paracel Island chain. USS Mustin fires 14 Tomahawks 22 seconds later. USS Chancellorsville fires 12 at the same interval. USS Curtis Wilbur fires 10-20 seconds after Chancellorsville. 52 Tomahawks total. 3 target complexes. Target Complex 1, Lingshui Air Base, H-6K Maritime Strike Regiment. 6 aircraft had recovered and were being rearmed for a second strike cycle, their parking positions known from satellite imagery taken 8 hours earlier. 16 Tomahawks. The 6 recovered aircraft on apron. The YJ-12 storage and maintenance building on the southern apron. Fuel storage. The regiment command facility. Hardened shelter entrances where 4 additional H-6Ks were positioned. Secondary detonations as YJ-12 propellant inventory ignites confirm the storage building's contents. Target Complex 2, Yongxing Island, PLAAF Forward Operating Detachment, the base from which 8 H-6K aircraft launched tonight's Western Axis salvo. The aircraft had already turned northeast post-release, but the forward infrastructure remained. YJ-12 pre-positioning storage bunkers on the island's western perimeter, the targeting radar facility, the command post, and satellite arrays. 18 Tomahawks. The bunkers take penetrating warheads. The radar facility takes 2 warheads. The command post takes 3 Block 5 warheads in timed succession. Communications destroyed. Target Complex 3. The PLAAF Maritime Strike Aviation Brigade Headquarters at Sanya on Hainan Island's southern coast. The command node that had planned and authorized tonight's H-6K strike, identified by EP-3E signals collection from Kadena over the preceding 72 hours. 18 Tomahawks. The communications arrays take the first 4 warheads, severing external communications before any warning can propagate to subordinate units. The main headquarters building takes 6 Block 5 penetrating warheads. The partially buried backup operations center on the facility's north perimeter takes 4 warheads in close interval sequence to defeat its 3-meter reinforced concrete overhead cover. At 2:40 a.m., the 2 A-18F Super Hornets recovered to the Reagan, rearmed with AGM-88E advanced anti-radiation guided missiles, and relaunched within 6 minutes of their AIM-120D intercept. Fly northwest on a suppression of enemy air defense mission against 3 PLAAF coastal radar sites on Hainan Island's eastern coast, whose emissions had been logged by USS Mustin's AN/SLQ-32 throughout the engagement. 12 AGM-88 AARGM missiles fire against the 3 radar sites between 2:58 a.m. and 3:03 a.m. All 3 radar sites eliminated by the AARGM's passive homing against their own emissions. At 2:43 a.m., 2 MQ-9 Reaper unmanned aircraft operating from Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, retasked from their standard South China Sea surveillance orbit at 2:29 a.m., turn northwest toward the Paracel Island chain. Their targeting: the 3 surviving H-6K aircraft from Yongxing that the E-2D's track data shows diverting from their standard return route to Lingshui, apparently attempting to land at a secondary PLAAF field at Sancha City on Yongxing Island, rather than complete the transit to Hainan in the post-strike environment. The MQ-9 S-Fire AGM-114R Hellfire missiles against all 3 aircraft as they complete their land and approach. All 3 aircraft neutralized on the Sancha runway before they can taxi to shelter. By 3:09 a.m., 47 minutes after the first YJ-12 separated from its H-6K, the Pacific Hammer counterstrike is complete across all 3 target complexes. Battle damage assessment, compiled by 7th Fleet Intelligence and Indopacom at 6 a.m. from P-8A post-strike radar coverage, MQ-9, FLIR imagery, and signals intelligence. Lingshui Air Base H-6K Regiment. 6 aircraft assessed as destroyed or severely damaged on the parking apron. YJ-12 storage and maintenance building destroyed with confirmed secondary detonations. Fuel storage destroyed. Regiment command facility communications destroyed and main structure severely damaged. 2 additional H-6K aircraft in hardened shelters assessed as damaged by penetrating warhead effects at shelter entrances. Yongxing Island Forward Operating Detachment. YJ-12 reserve storage bunkers destroyed. Radar facility destroyed. Command post destroyed with communications infrastructure eliminated. Sanya Maritime Strike Aviation Brigade Headquarters. Communications arrays destroyed. Main headquarters building severely damaged by Block 5 penetrating warheads. Backup operations center assessed as non-functional. 3 Hainan coastal radar sites, all eliminated by AARGM. 3 H-6K aircraft at Sancha Runway, all neutralized by MQ-9 Hellfire. Total PLAAF 6K Maritime Strike bomber losses associated with tonight's operation: 9 aircraft confirmed neutralized, 4 additional assessed as damaged. The PLAAF Maritime Strike Aviation Brigade's operational capacity to execute a follow-on YJ-12 strike against the Reagan strike group, assessed as degraded by 60 to 70% for a minimum of 30 to 45 days. Estimated PLAAF personnel. Casualties 44 to 67. American losses 0 aircraft. 0 ships damaged. USS Ronald Reagan 0 damage. 0 personnel casualties. At 3:14 a.m., the USS Ronald Reagan secures from general quarters. The formation transitions to elevated alert posture. Not normal, because normal will wait until the operational picture has stabilized, but the immediate threat has been eliminated. The flight deck crew begins spotting the Dawn Combat Air Patrol package forward. The E-2D extends its orbit, watching the northwest sector. The Reagan's dual-band radar sweeps the dark South China Sea in all directions without finding anything it has not already accounted for. The Reagan is undamaged. 16 knots northwest. Reactors at 39%. Air wing armed, Dawn launches 40 minutes away. 14 H-6K bombers and 28 YJ-12 missiles. 0 effect. The South China Sea is open. The formation sails northwest. The morning is coming.